Benzaguru Pema CD Hung, Ong Ah Hung Benzaguru Pema CD Hung, Ong Ah Hung Benzaguru Pema CD Hung. Welcome everyone to my Sunday afternoon Dharma talk here at Deer Park in Buddhism Sim. Today is the last talk of the series of 34 talks which we've been doing over the last 34 weeks. Seems hard to believe that we've been doing this for 34 weeks, but we have. It will be a very short talk this evening because these two final talks, if you've actually looked at them, they are summaries of the teachings which we've been discussing over the 34 weeks, and very difficult to summarize. So paradoxically, although they are two of the longer suttas in the Digha Nikaya, they actually have produced one of the shortest talks in the series. In fact, probably the shortest talk in the series, probably about 20 minutes. I also have a couple of announcements, or a few announcements. Although today is the day in which we discuss the final two suttas of the Digha Nikaya, it isn't quite the end of the series because next week I will be doing a summary review of the entire series of 34 suttas. I won't be discussing any particular suttas, but I will be summarizing the key insights that I hope we've gained from the talks over the past 34 weeks. So that will be the actual final talk of the series next Sunday. Also, these talks are going to be published as a hardcover book in the next 1 to 2 months, and we are having a draw for one copy of the book, which one person will be chosen at random to receive. I did send a notice out to both the Buddhist Center group and the Dharma Transmission to the West group. But in case you aren't a member of those groups or didn't see the notice, if you would like to be entered in the draw, please IM me, and I will enter you in the draw, which we will have next Sunday at the end of the talk. I must receive your entry by 11:59 p.m. Next Saturday, which I believe is June 6th, in order to be entered in the draw. So if you don't have to have participated in the series of talks in order to participate, so if you would like to be entered in the draw for a copy of the book, please IM me and I will enter you in the draw. Of course, this is a physical book, so you'll have to be willing to provide me with your name and mailing address if you would like to participate in the draw. Also, the Zongzung Sim, which is the official Sim of the Dharma Transmission to the West group. Some of you are aware of the fact that I became unemployed a couple of months ago. I'm no longer able financially to maintain the Sim. So tomorrow at approximately 10 p.m. Eastern Time, the Sim will go down and will cease to exist. If you're a resident of the Sim, you may want to remove your objects from the Sim. I'll return everything, of course. But if you have no copy objects in your room, you may want to remove them just to be safe. What was I going to say? I was going to say something else about that. Oh yes, the note cards. The note cards are available in the Sim still, in the middle of the Sim in the Shaolin Temple on the 2nd floor. Excuse me. So if you want to, you've got 24 hours approximately. If you're interested in taking any of those note cards from the bookshelf, please do that over the next day, and they'll be there until the Sim shuts down. Also, Sutta Central. Some of you may be aware of Ajahn Brahm. I'm not actually sure. It's run by Bhikkhu Sujato, who is a follower of Ajahn Brahm. It's called Sutta Central, and they've been picking up these talks on their website as well. So just as a matter of interest, if you're interested in Sutta Central, the talks are now available on the Sutta Central website as well. I think that's it. So let's begin. The 33rd sutta of the Digha Nikaya is called the Sangiti Sutta, which I'm translating as the Convocation. And in this sutta, the Buddha is staying at the mango grove of Chunda the Smith, who, you may remember from Sutta 16, would later fatally poison the Buddha at the end of his life. Pawa is, of course, the place where Mahavira, the leader of the Jains, had recently died. This sutta may therefore be dated towards the end of the Buddha's life. The Malans had built a new meeting hall called Upataka, which literally means something a lot like standing tall, which had not yet been used by anyone, and the Malas invited the Buddha to be the first person to speak there. The Buddha sat with his back against the central pillar, facing east, with the monastics sitting behind him against the western wall, also facing east. The Malans sat against the eastern wall. Uh-oh, someone can't hear me. I seem to be broadcasting. Anyone else have any problems hearing me? No? Okay, good. The Buddha, as I was saying, the Buddha sat with his back against the central pillar, facing east, with the monastics sitting behind him against the western wall, also facing east. The Malans sat against the eastern wall, facing the Buddha. This appears to have been the standard arrangement when the Buddha was giving formal public presentations. He taught Dharma well into the night, after which the Malans left, leaving the Buddha and the monastics alone. The Buddha suggested to Sariputta that he give a Dharma talk to the monastics, who were still not drowsy, while the Buddha stretched his back, which was aching. This is one of his symptoms, of course, that he had towards the end of his life. The Buddha lay down on his robe, neatly folded in four in the so-called lion posture, on his right side, within earshot of Sariputta. We know this because the Buddha subsequently approved of Sariputta's talk. And this is one of a number of suttas, therefore, in the Sutta Pali Canon, which is not actually spoken by the Buddha, but by a disciple of the Buddha, in this case Sariputta, who is one of the two foremost disciples of the Buddha, and reputed as the monastic foremost in wisdom. This must have been close to the end of Sariputta's life as well, because we know that he died before the Buddha did. Sariputta, alluding to the recent death of Mahavira, calls upon the monastics to recite the teachings of the Buddha in order to avoid the disgraceful state of affairs in the Jain order, much as described in Sutta 29, which we have already discussed in the talk on that sutta. So this sutta is actually a recitation sutta which the early monastics employed in order to summarize the teachings, in order to assist them in memorizing and maintaining the tradition. Consequently, it's essentially, I'm going to go into it. The balance of the sutta, 30 pages in Walsh's English translation, consists of a rehearsal of principles arranged in 230 numbered sets of items, starting with groups of 1 and ending with groups of 10 things. Thus, Sariputta speaks the balance of the sutta with the Buddha's approval. And the principles were chanted as follows: 2 sets of 1 thing, 33 sets of 2 things, 60 sets of 3 things, 50 sets of 4 things, 26 sets of 5 things, 22 sets of 6 things, 14 sets of 7 things, 11 sets of 8 things, 6 sets of 9 things, and 6 sets of 10 things. So you can understand how difficult this is to summarize. There are therefore 1,010 principles summarized in this short text, an amazing number that we cannot possibly cover in an hour. In fact, there are even more principles implied than this, because this list includes references to other groups, such as 3 unwholesome roots, 4 foundations of mindfulness, 5 aggregates, and many more. To attempt to cover it all would allow us just 3.5 seconds per item, which of course is impossible. Next, nor can we meaningfully discuss the 10 groups, because their only relationship with each other is the number of items in that group. This ingenious method, however, allowed the Dharma to be passed on from generation to generation in an extremely succinct and comprehensive manner, until, of course, it was written down in the 1st century before the Common Era. Finally, the 34th sutta of the Digha Nikaya is called the Dasuttara Sutta, which means literally multiples of 10. In this sutta, Sariputta is staying at the lotus pond of Gagara in Champa, in the territory of the Angas. Here, Sariputta classifies the Dharma into 10 sets of 10 things, much as in the previous sutta. In fact, this sutta appears to be a distillation of the principles of the previous sutta. These things are inherently and absolutely true, says Sariputta, perfectly realized by the Tathagata. Here, however, there are only, and I put that in quotation marks, only 550 items. Walsh points out, our translator, Walsh, points out that about 70% of these items overlap with the items listed in the previous sutta, for which reason we are discussing them together in this semi-final talk. However, it is still impossible to discuss each principle in the 6.5 seconds that would be allowed. So the following should be regarded as a simplification with minimal elaboration. The organization of the 10 sets of things in Sutta 34 follows a consistent logic, which actually does help us to understand the organization of the Sutta better than Sutta 33. And the first group is called Which Things Greatly Help. The second group is called Which Things Are to be Developed. The third group, Which Things Are to be Thoroughly Known. The fourth group, Which Things Are to be Abandoned. The fifth group, Which Things Conduce to Diminution. 6, Which Things Conduce to Distinction. 7, Which Things Are Hard to Penetrate. 8, Which things are to be made to arise. 9, Which things are to be thoroughly learnt. And finally 10, Which things are to be realized. You can see the logic of the progression from things that help to things that are to be realized, which makes this list far more accessible than the one in Sutta 33. In fact, the series of items may be seen as a summary recapitulation of the path itself. Items 1 to 3, which I'll just quickly repeat, which things greatly help, which things are to be developed, and which things are to be thoroughly known. Items 1 to 3 clearly constitute a group, followed by items 4 and 5, which things are to be abandoned and which things conduce to diminution. And finally, items 6 through 10, which things conduce to distinction, which things are hard to penetrate, which things are to be made to arise, which things are to be thoroughly learnt, and which things are to be realized. And I'll just put those things in the chat so you could actually see the organization there in the list, which I put in the chat. You can see the logic of the progression from, sorry, I said that. So these three groups correspond roughly to knowledge, morality, and finally meditation or spiritual praxis. It's an approximate correlation, but it does work to a certain extent. Items 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, 9, and 10, and you can see those in the list, have a positive character, whereas items 4, 5, and 7 have a negative cast. Items 4 and 5 also appear to be opposites of each other, so you can see there's an internal structure in this list. Each set of 10 addresses each of these items by including an increasing number, hence the title, multiples of 10, consisting of 1, 2, 3, etc. items. And at the end of each group, actually, Sariputta says, here are the 10 principles, here are the 20 principles, here are the 30 principles, and so on. Again, hence the title, multiples of 10. Perhaps by cross-referencing each of these groups of things, we can gain a summary insight into the Buddha Dharma. So that's how we're going to approach the summary that's going in this talk. This will give us 55 principles in each category. So the following summary is a simplification of the items presented in the sutta, so each group may not appear to add up to exactly 10 items, but if you go and look at the translation online, you'll see you'll see what I've done in order to make it more intelligible. And I've summarized the list in order to make it more accessible. So the summary of essential principles, beginning with things that greatly help, consist of tirelessness in wholesome states, mindfulness, clear awareness, association with good people, hearing the true Dharma, Dharma practice in its entirety, a favorable place of residence, perfect development of one's personality, past meritorious acts, the factors of endeavor, wisdom in the fundamentals of the holy life, wise consideration, and protective things. So this first group is a kind of foundation on which the rest of the things are built. The second group, things to be developed, consists of mindfulness of the body with pleasure. We've discussed that in the past, of course, that the Buddha, perhaps surprisingly to some, did not reject the concept of pleasure as such. Calm, insight, concentration, foundations of mindfulness, which of course we discussed in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the factors of enlightenment, the Noble Eightfold Path, perfect purity, and absorption in the objects of concentration, the so-called kasinas. Third group, things to be thoroughly known, consists of contact, mind-body, feelings, nutriments or foods, aggregates of grasping, sense spheres, stations of consciousness, worldly conditions, and abodes of beings. Then the fourth group, things to be abandoned, so these are negatives, ego conceit, ignorance, cravings, the hindrances, latent proclivities, which I would read as the sanskaras, the tendencies to proliferation, or the karmic tendencies that result from past karma, and the wrong eightfold path, plus wrong knowledge and wrong liberation. There is a wrong eightfold path, of course, as well as a noble or right eightfold path. 5, the things conducive to diminution, which is a rather strange word, but it means the things which work against liberation. Unwise attention, roughness, friendship with evil, unwholesome roots, attachments, mental blockages, disrespect, wrong practices, indolence, malice, and unwholesome courses of action. So these are, of course, things that ought to be got rid of. And then the complement, or the corollary, 6, things conducive to distinction. Again, a rather an odd word, but it's basically just the things which distinguish the path, which promote the path, the realization of the path. Wise attention, gentleness, friendship with the good, wholesome roots, freedom from attachments, respect, right practices, effort, overcoming malice, and wholesome courses of action. 7th, things hard to penetrate. That is to say, things are hard to understand or comprehend. Concentration, the root of the defilement and purification of beings, the elements of deliverance, the qualities of the true person. Inopportune times for leading the holy life, ontological differentiation, that is the underlying tendency to proliferation that underlies samsara, and the noble dispositions, the dispositions that promote nobility and realization. The 8th group, things to be made to arise. Unshakable knowledge, the destruction of the defilements, knowledge of past, present, and future, knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, knowledge of right concentration, stability, perception, and the thoughts of a great person, the thoughts that distinguish a great person. 9, things to be thoroughly learnt are nutriment, the conditioned and the unconditioned, the elements, the Four Noble Truths, the bases of deliverance, the grounds for commendation, the states of mastery, successive abidings, and the causes of wearing away. And finally, the 10th group, things to be realized, the highest group, unshakable deliverance of mind, knowledge and liberation, knowledge of karma, the fruits of the ascetic life, the branches of dharma and knowledge and vision and liberation, the super knowledges, mainly the psychic powers, so-called, the powers of an arhat, the jhanas or ecstasies, and the Noble Eightfold Path, plus he's added 2 items, knowledge and right liberation. This is a summary, of course, so many of these principles are principles with which we're already familiar from our discussion of the suttas that we've engaged in over the past 34 weeks. So that's the talk. That completes the talk. That completes the series of talks on the 34 suttas of the Digha Nikaya. Next week, as I mentioned, I'll do a final talk in which I'll give a very high-level overview summary of what we've talked about over the past 34 weeks. But it won't be specific to the suttas. It will just be a very high-level summary of the highlights of what we've been discussing. So in terms of the specific discussion of the suttas, that does complete the series of talks on the Digha Nikaya. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It has been my pleasure and privilege. I won't close down the discussion quite yet before we proceed to the dedication of merit. Does anyone have any questions, discussion, or comments about anything we've discussed either in this talk or any of the previous talks that we've had over the past 34 weeks? Anything at all? That is, of course, only one book, too. The Pali Canon is 40 volumes in length. It's taken us 34 weeks just to complete the first book of the Sutta Pitaka. So you can imagine how much more there is in the Pali Canon. But the Digha Nikaya is the first and consists of a collection of the longer suttas. I won't say the longest suttas, because in the next book, the Majjhima Nikaya, there are suttas which are just as long as the suttas in the Digha Nikaya for some reason. Yes, I do know about Access to Insight, which also has translations of these suttas. Access to Insight has translations. We've been using the Maurice Walsh translation, of course, and is also the Rhys Davids translations as well in 3 volumes, which were published in the early part of the 20th century. Their translations are a bit dated, but the introductory essays to the suttas are very interesting. And if you go to archive.org and type in Dialogues of the Buddha, you'll find them, and they're well worth spending some time with. So I'll just remind you that we are doing a draw next Sunday for the book that will be based on these talks, hardcover book, 1 copy. Please IM me if you would like to participate in the draw, and I'll add you to the draw. No requirements to participate. You can enter the draw whether you've attended all the talks or none of them. And I'll send out a couple more messages to the Dharma transmission to the West group as well as the Buddha Center group over the next week, just to remind people to get as large a number of participants as possible. Also, this talk and all the others are available on note card, so if you'd like a copy of the note card of this talk, please IM me, and if you'd like to get note cards of the previous talks, they're still available in the Shaolin Temple 2nd floor library until approximately 10 p.m. tomorrow night, Eastern Time. So if you'd like to collect any of those note cards, now is the time to do it. And I will be going to Zhangzhung for our final gathering in the circle after this talk, and you're welcome to join me there if you're interested in carrying on the discussion. So, it seems no one has any questions, so let's proceed then with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. Whatever understanding, whatever positive forces come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much once again for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. I'll be back again next Sunday to finish up with an overview of the series of talks on the suttas of the Digha Nikaya. And anyone who's interested in joining me in Zungzung, the name of the sim is Visit Atoll. Namaskar. Argus Portal just asked a question. Will you teach in the future here? Absolutely. Next week we will, as I said, well, I've said several times, I don't think I need to repeat myself. I'll be here next Sunday, and then I will be taking a break while I prepare the book for publication. It'll take me a few weeks to typeset it and prepare it for publication. I am thinking of doing some more talks. As I mentioned, the Digha Nikaya is very interesting because the title of the Digha Nikaya means the collection of long suttas. The Majjhima Nikaya, the second book, is called the collection of middle-length suttas. But in fact, there are suttas in the Digha Nikaya which are shorter than the suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. There are suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya which are longer than suttas in the Digha Nikaya. So there seems to be some other organizational principle at work here than simply length of the suttas. What that principle is, I'm still trying to figure out exactly. No one else has discussed this as far as I know, but they do seem to be independent collections of each other in some sense, which were rather arbitrarily named, which is intriguing. Anyway, that's a long way around to getting to answer your question, which is there are 5 talks in the Majjhima Nikaya. There are more suttas altogether in the Majjhima Nikaya than in the Digha Nikaya, but there are 5 talks in the Majjhima Nikaya which are as long as the average length of the talks in the Digha Nikaya. So I'm thinking of doing a series of 5 talks on those specific 5 suttas. I'd also like to do a talk on the Prajnaparamita, and I'd like to do a talk on the Lotus Sutra. So I am planning to do all of those talks, but it won't be for a while. There'll be a few weeks at least after I finish these talks, during which I won't be giving any talks, and then I'll give these other talks at intervals of weeks. It won't be at intervals of 1 week. It'll be a gap of several weeks, perhaps once a month or maybe once every 3 weeks. I'll give one of these additional talks. Any other questions before we conclude? Okay. Thank you once again. Thank you very much. Namaskar.